Hi there, Patrick Hoban here, and tonight I want to introduce you to a good friend of mine, Pastor Terry Reilly, that I have known since 1995. I invited him over to Hoban to Midnight to just chill and to talk and to relax and just shoot the breeze and talk to each other about the things that are important to us. So stay tuned, enjoy this first episode of Hoban to Midnight. Hoban to Midnight is sponsored by Surge Solutions for all your IT needs. That's surgesolutions.net. Visit them today. 3, 2, 1. All right, Terry. Terry, how are you today, my friend?
I'm real good, Patrick. It's really good to see you.
Good to see you too. Well, welcome to Hoban to Midnight, this new little thing, another project that I'm doing. And so basically it's about inviting my friends to my virtual living room and having good old conversations about stuff or whatever goes on. And so when I was going through the list of people that I thought would be interesting, anyway, it was based on the conversation that we had last week, stuff that we like to talk about. But I was thinking, Terry, how long we know each other, which is a long time. You think about it.
Yeah, it was back in Woodstock, Illinois days, wasn't it?
Yeah, 1995. 1995, and I remember distinctly what happened was Johnny Ashburn, of course, the pastor there, and I met you, I think, just outside his office, and I was introduced to you as the evangelism pastor. Do you remember?
I do.
Yeah. Who else was there? Amico, right?
Pastor Frank Amico was the youth pastor.
Yeah, that's right. And then Pastor Johnny, and I don't know if I just talked to Pastor Johnny.
After you visited, I came to your house to pay you a visit.
Oh, okay.
Went to your home and did like a follow-up visit.
That's right. But I know where I was at the time. I'm like a rolling stone, Terry. I'm always all over the place. So that was good. That was when I was very, very rookie. One of the reasons why I came over was because I wanted to learn the ministry. I didn't have a ministry background. So all I had was the full gospel businessman, a guy that was a plumber who had the healing ministry that didn't really know the Bible very well. And then some missionaries that I met in Belgium. And that was it. I didn't know anything else. A lot of theological books and whatever it was, and that was about it. So my goal was to learn more, And Pastor Johnny and I had great conversations. Of course, he was kind of like a Calvinist and I wasn't, so that was kind of the difference there. So
that's very good.
He's a good man. He's a good man. So tell me what's happening down. So you were up in Illinois, then you pastored down in Southern Illinois for a while, right? Where was that again? Because I visited you down there.
Yeah, I was down by Edwardsville, Illinois,
okay.
Down in kind of central. I was down there for a couple of years, and then God called us back home, which would be Crystal Lake, Illinois.
Yeah.
So we went back up there, and we were there for 18 years.
18 years over at that's First Assembly of God in Crystal Lake.
Calvary
Assembly. Yeah, Calvary Assembly of God. Yeah, you're a true pastor. I have not got that pastoral gift like you do. There's no doubt about it, Terry. You just have that way about you. You're a pretty good preacher too.
Well, I asked the Lord because my heart is evangelism.
Yeah.
And in the marketplace, And then when the Lord told me, He says, the people right now are going through a difficult time. They don't need an evangelist.
Yeah.
They need a shepherd. And I said, well, what's that? And so I had to learn what it meant to be a shepherd. And I've been shepherding ever since.
Yeah. No, it was good. I think you have a really pleasant demeanor. You're very even-keeled, pleasant demeanor. Now, your wife, on the other hand, she's like a busy bee,
Yeah, and you ought to see her after a couple cups of coffee. I mean,
I have mine, of course.
Of course. But yeah, she's like that all the time. I've known her, I just thought about the other day, I've known her for 46 years because we were high school sweethearts.
Wow.
And I think probably in the 46 years, she's probably had 4 or 5 bad days.
Really?
Yeah.
Unbelievable.
Amazing lady of God.
No, she's wonderful. She's just full of joy and energy, and I don't know how she does it. I really don't. And then you have 4 boys, right?
Yeah, we raised 4 sons.
Yeah.
3 out of 4 of them are married, and we have 9 grandchildren.
Wow, 9 grandchildren. I'm not anywhere close to that yet. I have 4 children, but none of them have their own children. Thank God, right? They're a little bit young.
Yeah.
So then you were 18 years. So, what was different between Illinois as a pastor and an evangelist? What did you kind of learn through that, Terry? What was the transition or?
Well, the evangelist part of it I enjoyed because I did a lot of outreaches and saw a lot of people come to Christ. And then did some follow-up because I was real big. I put evangelism and discipleship together because they went hand in hand. And if we didn't do any kind of follow-up, then it was a waste of time. We wanted to see the word of God to stick with people, and we wanted them to grow. We just didn't want them to have an experience. We didn't want it to be an event. We wanted it to be a lifelong commitment to Christ.
Yeah.
And so we put those two together. And so I just took what I learned in evangelism and just became a soul-winning pastor and encouraged my peers to get out of their offices and get out where the people are. There's time for administration, but I'd rather be out where the people are.
Yeah, no, you're definitely a people person. That's for sure, So then you did the ministry up there for 18 years. I think a lot of people, this is what strikes me. And it's like this with everything, really. It's like this with people in jobs or management. Because they've never maybe managed a business or never did anything, they don't really have a true perspective of what it is like to be a manager or an owner of a business or whatever it might be. I think a lot of people fill in the gaps because they just don't know. I think it's the same thing for pastors. I think a lot of people fill in gaps or they imagine what it's like to be a pastor. I think what a lot of people forget is that pastors are just ordinary people with ordinary problems, with ordinary stuff. Don't you think?
The biggest thing that I can relate to what you said, I was never really a businessman. But what I learned about how to be a shepherd, how to be a pastor, was from my athletic background. I was a teacher and a coach before I was a pastor. And so I would strategically be able to take my players and put them into the right positions. So if it was a basketball setting or a baseball setting, I got to know the players and I got to know their giftings. And I put them in the best place that they could benefit for the team to win. So that carried over into my spiritual life, and that I would get people around me who had better giftings than I did, different giftings than I did, and that came up with an awesome team.
Yeah, no, that really is it. It's like trying to find everybody's little role. What I found is, look, I grew up in Ireland, of course, and then I came to America. And I think the media does a terrible job of highlighting the eccentricities of any society, right? So I really had a wrong opinion. It wasn't a bad opinion of America, but it was a wrong opinion of America. And when I came to America, especially the Midwest, I found out how average people are. And what I have found is that most people are kind of the same everywhere in the world. They have the same ideas. They want to live a pretty good life. If they're Christians, they want to have or even non-Christians want to have their kids to do better. And then what I found out about Americans is Americans are very, very generous people, extremely generous. A lot of people think they're not, they're greedy. But my experience has been quite the opposite. What do you think about that, Terry? I don't know. You didn't live overseas, right? Ever? You're.
No, I traveled and did ministry overseas a lot as far as preaching and teaching. I did that. And but as far as your comment about Americans being generous, I would say the majority of them are very generous.
Yes, indeed.
Especially when they develop a relationship with you, because their relationships have to be built on trust and respect.
Yeah.
And they know that if you're not particularly looking for something or you don't want to take advantage of them,
yeah,
they will be extremely generous to you. And that's just something that's a good quality in the United States.
I absolutely believe that. I lived in, of course, Ireland. I lived in Europe for a while. And then I lived in the United States. I've been all around this country, except Texas and the Northeast. Everywhere else I've been. And people are just very generous. They are. They're very helpful. I tried to explain this to people when I talk to them from Europe, because they look at the news and they think everybody's killing each other or everybody is mad in the stores. And I said, no, they're not. It's not like that at all. In fact, people are very polite, very understanding. They go out of your way to help you. I have had nothing. Sure, in every society you have your oddball, right? But I have had nothing but really good interactions with Americans. I've learned something, Terry. I learned the Irish know how to relax. Your last name is Reilly, right? So you probably know a little bit about that.
Well, at least half of it.
That's right. Now, your mother's side was Greek, is that correct?
She was from Sparta, Greece.
Wow. And you got to play, or you were assigned to the basketball, right?
I actually made the basketball team to play in Thessalonica. So as a new Christian, I was excited right after college to go play basketball in Europe. Yeah. But Debbie and I got married. There was a teaching position right in our hometown that was open. And I found out that if I went, since I'm half Greek, that I would have had to go into the army.
In the Greek army?
Yes, because I was half Greek. And so that was one of the deterrents for not actually going. But it was a nice compliment to know you made the team to play European basketball.
Now, did you ever get back to Greece at all yourself?
I have never been to Greece one time.
Really?
No, I met the Greek coach in Washington, D.C. when I went for tryouts. I played 3 days in a row with 102 fever, still was able to play because of passion and dedication.
Yeah.
And we went out to dinner with an interpreter, and he said, "I want you to come."
Really? Thessalonica. What a biblical town, even,
Oh, I know. As a baby Christian, I was all excited about that.
Yeah, no. Well, what I found was Irish know how to relax, that's for sure. When I lived in Europe, what I found out about Europeans were they never accepted second best. Everything, especially the Northern Europeans. Like if you bought a pair of shoes or shirts they wanted the stitching to be exact. They were just very meticulous. And then when I came to America, I found that the American quality was generosity, for sure, big into volunteerism. But one thing, what struck me about America was it's never too late to start again. That was the big thing that I kind of caught over here. It was never too late to start again. No matter what happens to you in your life, you can start again, which I think is a fantastic attribute. Because I've had to start again. So,
It is. And a lot of people in America, too, will fight for the underdog. And people that have gone through difficult times, and they see that you're trying, they want you, they're a big fan of yours. They want you to rebound back.
Yeah.
And they'll do what they can to see you, to help you get back on your feet. Yeah. And again, that's another value. It's another quality of American people.
Yeah, I consider myself Irish by birth, but American in the truest sense of the word, in philosophy, in many regards. Of course, we're Christians, and so you can be a Christian anywhere, but really that philosophy of freedom, individual rights, that kind of stuff, I truly admire. So now you're down in Florida. How dare you?
Well, it was only 82 today, and so it was kind of cool to go swimming, but we had.
Oh yeah, really? Now, really,
we had to suffer for Jesus.
Tell us your woes there.
But we're in a place called the Villages, and the Villages has 100,000 seniors that are retired. Yeah, we're about 45 minutes from Orlando, about 45 minutes to an hour from Tampa, St. Pete.
Okay.
So either way, we could go to the Gulf of Mexico or the Atlantic Ocean. But we're right in this community of all these people that worked hard all their life and now have retired. And it's a huge golf community. I've never seen so many golf carts in my life.
Really?
Came down here.
Really? Now, are you a golfer yourself or not?
I am a golfer, but I'm not a member of any of the clubs. You have to be a member and pay certain fees and everything.
Yeah.
But there's 18 golf courses down here.
18, my. Now, so you went down there. Did you have a church when you went down there first, Terry, or? What happened?
No, I'll make this story real short for you. When we lived in Illinois, after we resigned the church after 18 years, Debbie and I did some work with hospice together in Illinois. And we were doing real well with hospice. And then we found out that Debbie's mom and dad, who are retired in Florida, got into a terrible car accident. And we were trying to figure out, as we had a lot of discussions in prayer about what should we do, because Debbie's other siblings didn't have the flexibility to be able to go to help the parents.
Mm-hmm.
And so we prayed about it, and we said, you know what? We're going to leave all of our grandchildren. We're going to leave our careers. We're going to leave everything that we know and work so hard at and network with people. And we're going to trust God, and we're going to go to Florida and do the adult thing. You know, most children were taught, honor your mother and father.
Mm-hmm.
We did it as adults,
Mm-hmm.
and we honored her parents. God sold our house in 3 days.
Really?
And we went down there. We gave away 90% of our stuff or sold it. And we went down there, and they live in a beautiful ranch. So we had one side of the house, they had the other. But after we got down there and they recovered from their car accident, we didn't know it, but my wife's mom had to have triple bypass surgery.
Wow.
And we almost lost her. And so we stayed with them as caregivers. The only pastor I knew in Florida was in Orlando. We had no jobs. I worked part-time teaching students to drive. And believe me, they need help down here in Florida. We're driving. And my wife worked at a department store. We both worked part-time. We made only $8,000 one year, and the second year we made like $8,500. And at our age, you should be saving towards retirement if Jesus tarries.
Yeah.
So on paper, it didn't make any sense, but we have absolutely zero regrets. We do it all over again. We were just showing the love of Christ to her parents. And that's what brought us to Florida for 2 years, until God opened a door for a church. And the church that I'm now pastoring, a couple of years ago, they lost their lead pastor. He died of cancer at a young age, and they didn't have anybody. So the Assemblies of God knew that I was over about 2 hours away and asked if I could come and help. And so I drove for a year straight. It was 2 hours one way. I drove back and forth for a year to be their pastor and help a grieving church, wonderful, loving church, because of the loss of their wonderful pastor. And finally, after a year, I had to say, you know what, folks, you're going to have to join me in prayer if you want us to live closer. I need a full-time job. And so we prayed, and sure enough, God opened the door for me to have a hospice interview to be a chaplain right in the villages. And after my first interview, they hired me on the spot. And in the interview, I said, well, my wife will be excited. And they said, what does she do? I said, oh, she also works for hospice. She was the volunteer coordinator. And all the ladies in the interview started saying, all the hairs on their hands started getting up. I said, what's the matter? They said, a volunteer coordinator? Well, that's the next position we want to hire. When can she come in?
Wow.
They hired her 2 days later.
Isn't that something? Wow.
So we went from having nothing, no jobs, not knowing anybody, to 2 full-time hospice jobs. And I'm pastoring a church part-time, so I've never been bivocational before. It's a smaller church, which I really prefer, because we have relationships, and that's what it's all about.
Yeah, yeah. You know, that's interesting, you know, that you say all that. There's 2 things that strike me there is God's providence, right? Sometimes we just don't know what in the world we're doing. Do you ever get into that place? I know I have. You know, I'm a Holy Spirit guy, so I like to be led by the Spirit. But sometimes you're like, yeah, I think I made the right decision, but what in the world is happening? But then God seems to open up a door somehow, maybe not at the time that you thought it, and then all this stuff happens. How did you get the pastor? Oh, the Assemblies of God called you for the pastor job, right?
Yeah, and then I talked to the pastor's wife who was leading the church, and
Okay.
she didn't want to be the lead. She wanted to do music and children. And so I came over and I said, I'd be happy to take the lead for that. But there was many times walking on the beach praying, God, could you please push up this timetable a little bit? Because, 2 years, we're ready to go. Her parents are doing better, so we're ready for our next assignment.
Yeah.
And sure enough, he opened the door that was just beautiful.
That's amazing. Just the providence of God. I know in my own life, you kind of look at things, and when you're in the midst of that, it's difficult, right? It is really difficult. But then all of a sudden, something happened. I tell you what happened to me recently. So, some crazy stuff happened. I was been trying to be up in Minneapolis, which I love that town. Out of all the towns I've lived in, I really love that town, except for the cold. The cold, I don't like. And then what happened was I was going to go to Ireland for a little bit. My son was over there, and I was going to spend some time over there and kind of had things set up. And then I didn't have peace at all. I just didn't feel peace about it. This is before this coronavirus took on. I said one morning, I said, I'm not going. I just don't feel peace about it, but I have no clue what I'm going to be doing. And then another situation opened up where I'm helping a guy with his tech company, and I'm the chief strategist, whatever that means. It's vague enough so that nobody knows exactly what I do, but it's kind of fits in where I'm at. And then I'm doing this other stuff as well. So it's just the providence of God, and God only knows what's going on. So you do hospice as well. So how is this coronavirus? What's your thoughts on that, Terry?
Well, Florida, my thoughts are on it is all about perspective and all about people leadership. First of all, the perspective part of it, and you and I talked about it, and I'd like you to let your audience hear your perspective because it's better than mine, because you really taught me about, let's look at history, and let's look back at all the people and what they went through in history. And the coronavirus is serious. Yes, as people get sick. Yes, people die. But compared to what people went through in history, it's not that bad.
Yeah.
But the perspective, our governor here in Florida has really taken the lead. And other states are probably learning from him about being safe, but also we need to get the economy back going. So there's a safety factor and also an economic factor. So we actually opened our church for the first time last Sunday with all the safety factors, and I made it optional for people to come. They could stay home and watch it online, but if you're going to come, we're going to have the seats marked green for go, where you can sit. Most people wore their masks. People were washing their hands. But we came back together as a church family, and it was just fantastic.
Yeah, people need it. We're social beings. God is social. He's Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. We're made in his image. We need that social interaction. We just do. And for the most part, I think that churches, what surprised me was that churches could pivot so quickly. They went from gathering weekly to online services, I think faster than most businesses did. I really do. And that just shows me that the church always uses the latest technology. It has been that way historically. Mm-hmm. I was talking to my brother about it, Thomas, who, pastors churches there in Cork. And he said, well, that's obvious. When the printing press came out, who was the first to really use it? And it was the church, it was the Christians. And that struck me as something. But I also think that there has to be a real, and I don't like the word balance, but correct way of thinking. Because I know for sure a lot of people are hurting right now. Small businesses, they're wondering, they can't sustain this. So there has to be some clear, sensible leadership. You can't shut down the economy for 4 or 5 months. It just doesn't work. And granted, okay, people got a check for $1,200. You and I know $1,200 doesn't go very far.
No.
Doesn't go very far. And so people want to work, and they're not stupid. They're not ignorant. What struck me, and it was kind of funny, but not so funny at the same time. If you remember at the beginning of the crisis, they were saying, don't wear a mask. And then they were saying, well, if you had a mask, you wouldn't know how to wear a mask. And then they were telling us how to make a mask. And now they're saying masks are mandatory. I mean, say, come on. Do you really think we're that stupid? So there's a little bit of elitism, I think, in some of the leadership. which I don't particularly like. I hope they don't abuse it. And I hope that we get a sensible return to some sort of normalcy, because we can't go on forever. I get
There's
it.
there's an amazing entrepreneurship that's coming out of this as well, though, and some creativity. God gave me an idea of what I could just do locally for our local hospital, because of course there's a lot of patients that we would receive in hospice from hospitals. And I said, Lord, what can we do that's something real practical? And I actually called the CEO, who's over 2 hospitals in the area. And I said, do you need money for masks? Do you need money for gloves? Do you need money for gowns? He says, no, I got a budget for that. And we got a direct line. We can get all of our supplies. I said, well, let me think of something practical. And so we put our heads together and came up with, how many employees you got at one hospital? He said, 1,100. I said, okay, 1,100. So if I go to the mom and pop restaurants that are hurting, not the national chains, but let me go to the mom and pop restaurants that are hurting, and I want to get each employee a $10 gift card. So that way, when they're doing their 12-hour shifts, they can just call and have lunch delivered or dinner delivered. And I said, I know it's $10 isn't a lot, but that's $11,000.
Yeah.
And I want to partner with my church and Compassionate Care Hospice, who I work for. And by doing that, to get the word out that we are raising money to buy these gift cards from everyone from the custodian up through the nurses and everyone in between. Not only are we going to give them gift cards, but we're going to have opportunity to be able to pray for them, because in my opinion, these are health care warriors. Yeah. They are heroes. And I simply call it blessing the front line.
Yeah, that's very good. You're very innovative. I always like that about you. There is a lot of innovation. Even that what we're doing now tonight is innovation. And, people will find a way out of that. And, there's going to be a lot of changes. I have a brother-in-law in Ireland, and they're thinking about working from home for a whole year. So that's going to change an awful lot. And so, yeah, I did a little video recently. I called it Think Like King Kong. I don't know if you saw it or not.
I heard you talk about it.
Yeah. So the idea, and I always taught my boys this, I said, think like King Kong. And it was based on, during, of course, the Great Depression, where, what was it, 30% unemployment, it was a terrible time. But during that time, 2 directors had an idea to make the movie King Kong. Now, there's no money, nobody's investing, everybody's retracting. And they came up with this idea, King Kong. My father loved that movie. And they spent $700,000 on that movie. Very innovative for the time. 1933, I think they started it, somewhere around about there. A lot of money. And it was innovative. They used big screens. They had dinosaurs. They had all this stuff on there. And it came out, I think, in 1935. And it grossed, think about this now, it grossed $5 million.
Wow.
And I always think like King Kong. In any time you pivot, there's something happens, there's a gap. And if you just think for a second, what is needed right now in that gap? Can you provide for it? And what I'm trying to say to people is sharpen the saw. Just sharpen the saw. Make sure that when you come out of this, you have real value, your business is ready to go, whatever it is, think innovative ways. And, look, we have the Spirit of God. Surely we can come up with some good ideas, So that's how I'm thinking about it.
Christians, in my opinion, we should be the smartest, the kindest, the most generous, because as you already know, in the book of James, it says, if any man lacks wisdom, go ahead and ask God. And what does he say? I'm going to give it to you generously.
Yeah. So
that's why Christians need to stay plugged into their Heavenly Father, so that he can give us wisdom and discernment for these times that we're living in.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I really believe that. Now, one gentleman that I was with last weekend, they had a little family get-together around a bonfire. And he said, what change do you think that's going to happen? Well, there's going to be a lot of change for sure. But he said, what I found was that people were a lot nicer. It's interesting when people go through trial and everybody's going through trial together, everybody kind of says, well, we're kind of going through this the same way. And people are generally nicer. I've had no problem in stores. I don't know about you. People were, no, you get the odd nervous person, but that's general. You get the odd nervous person on a good day, you know.
Yes.
But generally, people are nice. Cashiers are nice. People are friendly. People are helpful. I've had no real issues at all.
And I think it's important because for people to have the message that we are all in this together. And what good is it going to do to chew someone out or to be mean to somebody, but to be kind? And so we are all in this together. And I remember what the United States was like after 9/11.
Yeah.
After 9/11, the churches were packed.
Yeah.
And people, even on the roadways, were nice and polite, driving their
car. For a while anyway, right?
For a while, yeah, it lasted for a while. But I just noticed that America came together. Why? Because we were in it together.
Yeah.
Well, so we're in this COVID-19 thing together. And I believe that it's time for the church to take the lead and not lead from the rear, but take the lead in the front and say, you know what? We're going to be different coming out of this thing than we were as we went in it.
Yeah. Attitude. That's why, you know, I read the Bible every day. And I don't read the Bible because I have to. I read the Bible because I'm curious. Basically, that's what drives me. I want to learn. I want to know. But when you develop that personal relationship with Jesus, the Son of God, and you have that intimacy, what happens is it's not faith in faith, it's faith in a person, right? It's faith in a person. And people we talked about a fear and faith. Mm-hmm. But fear, I wrote it down recently. Fear is about the unknown, right? It's about the unknown. But faith is not just an attitude of thinking. It really is a leaning, a trust in a person. And so when you can lean on a person, it makes everything a lot different. Well, as I am, I'm a student of history. So I wrote down a few names. And I love history. And these are people that went through plagues. You want to hear something?
I do.
Marcus Aurelius. He was one of the the good emperors. He was a Stoic philosopher. He's portrayed in the movie Gladiator. Remember, his son or whatever it was killed him. So Marcus Aurelius, and he wrote the book Meditations. It's a great book to read because it's about self-control and it's about thinking. He went through a plague that lasted 16 years, and whole villages were wiped out in the Roman Empire during that time. So that's Marcus Aurelius. Another one was Martin Luther. Martin Luther, there was a plague ravaging Europe during that time. I think that plague came on and off for 100 years. So that was devastating. Isaac Newton, I didn't realize that. Isaac Newton, he kind of hit himself where he wrote a lot of his stuff during a plague. And then William Shakespeare. Interesting, isn't it? William Shakespeare was living during the plague as well. Now, here's what's interesting too. People talk about social distancing as a new thing or an old thing. In 1666, of course, they didn't understand that the plague was carried by fleas. They thought it came through the air, which a lot of viruses do. What they did in London was, if a member of the family had the plague, they would paint a red cross on the door, and they weren't allowed to leave the house, I think, for 2 weeks or more. And people would bring them food and leave it outside the door. So they weren't allowed to leave there. They were quarantined. And then after a number of weeks, I think it was 2 or it could have been more, they would put a white cross on the door. And that's where we get the Red Cross idea.
Red Cross, right.
Isn't that interesting?
Yeah.
So, and then I was telling people, some people at the beginning were kind of, in my view, they were misunderstanding faith. Because they were saying, no, we can overcome everything, we'll just hang out. And we heard a lot of horror stories of pastors even dying because I think that they had misaligned faith. Because if you look at the Old Testament, if somebody had leprosy, which could have been any skin disease, wasn't just leprosy, they were told to stay outside the camp. And then the priest had to examine them, because the priest acted as the physician. And if the leprosy was gone, they went through ritual cleansing and they were allowed back into the camp again. So it's nothing new. It's nothing new at all. So that's kind of how my perspective was on it. So,
Well, I think it's a good perspective for everyone to look at is what everybody went through. Now, as I look back at my own parents, my parents were married at World War II time.
Yeah.
And, my dad had to say goodbye to my mom and to go to war. And then, of course, other relatives that were a little bit older had to go through the Great Depression. So,
that's right.
And then we look at church history and all the different persecutions of the church and underground church and everything else. So the underground church, and when the persecution comes and we get squeezed in, we feel that our walls are coming in on us. That is time we see in history, especially church history, of people just growing leaps and bounds in their faith and believing God can do the impossible.
Yeah.
And that's the kind of faith that I'm looking for people that I worship with, people that I want to hang out with, is believing God can do the impossible.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm hoping we don't get persecution like Nero, but as you know, I like to read the church fathers too, and there's a lot of great history there. And what's interesting is that the Christians were noted for their hospitality during famines and plagues, which of course then was a great witness to people. But what also was a great witness to any persecutions was their bravery in the midst of it. And of course, in the Roman world, honor was a huge thing. Now, the average, pagan at that time didn't understand. Why didn't you sacrifice to Caesar, But what happened was, eventually, even the public said, no, these are good people. These are honorable people. And the church grew. Now, hopefully, we don't have to go through that. I don't feel like getting burned at the stake. And then, of course, the massive persecutions that started in Europe with the Waldensians, and that was just horrible. And I think anybody should read Fox's Book of Martyrs.
Yes.
It's a great book.
Yeah, I think that now the message to the church is it's not about just honoring God, but it's also about courage.
Yeah.
Courage, wisdom, and discernment. I like my top three.
Yeah.
I'm not undermining faith at all, but because sometimes people do have the misconception about faith. And I like to keep faith real simple. And I learn a lot about faith from my grandchildren, because when they pray, they have no doubts at all.
Yeah.
They don't doubt anything.
Yeah.
I'm praying to God, He's going to answer that prayer.
Yeah.
There's that confidence. But courage, discernment, wisdom, it's just like the tribe of Issachar in the Old Testament. They knew the times that they were living in. And I think that we have to be sharp and we have to be ready to take the lead.
Yeah, exactly. Now, I know we're living in America, and America is a very political country. Most countries are political. Most countries. You get on the news, it's always talking about politics. And it was interesting when I was pastoring the church there, people would come up to me and say, well, why don't you talk about this? Why don't you talk about that? Oh my goodness, the whole world is falling apart because this guy got elected and this guy didn't get elected. And I said to him, if the church survived Nero and Vaspian and the plagues and persecutions and monarchies and everything else, and we're still here, we're not gone, I think we can survive a presidency. I think we need to just get a little bit perspective. The kingdom of God is not going anywhere. We want freedom. Of course, we want to pray for elected officials. But perspective is huge, isn't it? Don't you think?
It is. Last Sunday was Mother's Day. So my wife, I always have her preach every Mother's Day. And she did a really great job. But beforehand, I shared really out of Romans 13, the first two verses about the governing authorities and how we need to respect them, pray for them, how God instituted them and put them in position And I said, well, there's a fine line, there's a balance too of what we're facing now, especially churches in the North.
Yeah.
Are having this, their governors just saying, putting them on the same playing field as a sports team or as Hollywood, when the church is not on that playing field.
No.
The Church of God is above that. And we do a lot more. The church is not about entertainment or about performance. It's about preaching the word and seeing the power of God transform people's lives.
Yeah. The church is there. I mean, they say, how many churches that Terry, that have food pantries that help people all the time? I mean, say there's a lot of help that goes out of churches. I was talking to, in actual fact, what happened was I got a text message on Facebook from a friend of mine in India. And, I love India. Just God has put that country on my heart. I haven't been back there for years. But he said, can you help at all? He was kind of a general text message that he sent out. He said, we have pastors in the villages. They're under lockdown. They have no money. Of course, a lot of the workers that they are, they're daily workers or weekly workers. So if they don't work in the fields or they don't do work, they don't get paid. There's just no money. And he said they're going hungry. And of course, he has 175 churches. So they call him, And then I have another friend of mine in Hyderabad, and pastors in the villages are calling him. My heart went out to him because that's real. That's not, I was at the grocery store and about 2 months ago. And so we're just going around doing a little bit of shopping, and there was a gal behind the counter, and I said, how are you holding up with everything, just trying to encourage her. She said, oh my goodness, she said, it's like the Great Depression. Now, I didn't laugh at her, but I said to her, sweetheart, this is not the Great Depression. We bought steak today, but out there, it is really like in the villages, like a Great Depression. But thankfully, again, in the midst of all of this, Terry, I put out a simple video out there. In the midst of all of this, people gave. These people are not rolling in millions of dollars. They might give $10, $50. Some people gave a lot more than that. So now we're able to send out money in the next week or so to help these dear pastors. That to me shows the real benevolent heart.
Generosity thing you were talking about before.
Absolutely.
People just wanted to share what God's blessed them with.
Absolutely. And some of them, one person gave $9. Maybe that was the last $9 they had. Another person gave $15. A lot of people are out of work, but they're thinking, I can give $10, $15. It just shows me that there's a lot of good people out there. So when I hear people talking negativity, I just don't listen to it at all. I just don't. I don't listen to it, But you were talking about, when we talked a couple of weeks ago about fear and faith, and you were kind of doing a perspective on it. What did you think a little bit more about that, Terry? Or what?
I did. I actually had the newspaper call me and just asked me how I was doing as far as the church, how I was going with hospice, because I still see patients every day, and I'm required to wear a mask. But I'm going into facilities, I'm going into people's homes, and when this all first came out, I would say what was really taking the lead was fear.
Mm.
And fear was taking the lead because of lack of education. Fear was taking the lead because things were not being communicated the way they should have. A lot of times the media will try to strike that fear, or the politicians love when there's a crisis, they'll take advantage of the crisis, unfortunately.
Yeah.
But fear was taking the lead for the longest time in this community. And then just by communicating to different churches and pastors and people that I know and preaching faith over fear, and let that be the message everywhere we went, every time we talked to somebody, faith over fear, I could see it starting, the fear to start to go to the background instead of the forefront, because it started out in the forefront. But after you communicate saying, hey, can I remind you who God is? God didn't bring you this far to have you fail right now.
Mm-hmm.
You know, the Lord's not going to give up on you, and you're not going to fail. He's going to keep blessing you and providing you, but you have a responsibility. I think a lot of Christians, you know, sometimes we can get a little selfish and act like God's a Santa Claus and just say, you know, Lord, give me this, give me that. And, you know, he does, but, you know, we have a responsibility to walk by faith and to walk in obedience.
Yeah.
So faith, at least in this area, has now taken the lead where it should be.
Yeah.
And we're blessed by that.
You know, also too, I think what happens is you get jolted, obviously. Something disastrous happens. You get jolted. And then it takes a while for your equilibrium to get back again. I call it the speed wobble. You know, I don't know if you ever got into a speed wobble, Terry, but I used to cycle a bicycle years ago.
Is that an Ireland thing, or is it?
No, if you're going down, I used to have this little racing bike, and I used to travel out to Tramore, which was about 7 miles away from where I lived. And what they had hills. And what I used to try and do is go as fast as the cars when I went down the hill. It might have been only 40 miles an hour, 35 miles an hour, whatever it might be. But the worst thing that could happen is if you got that darn speed wobble. Because what happens, the bike starts vibrating. And if you don't get it under control, you're going to end up in the ditch. So I call it a speed wobble. I did come up with a thing called right life dissonance. Because as you know, I went through something and it really took me a long time to get through it, you know. And I really didn't know what in the world was going on. And I tried to examine it. And I called it right life dissonance. And I compared it to a gyroscope. You know, when you spin a gyroscope, it stays upright no matter what. But then it loses momentum and it starts wobbling a little bit. And if you don't get that momentum back, what happens is you crash, right? And that's not pleasant. So I think what happens is, you know, something like this comes out of left field. And people, you know, they get into a little bit of a speed wobble. But as they get used to it, as they kind of begin to navigate it, especially if they're believers, they have a foundation, as it were, a groundwork. What happens is they get back their equilibrium again and begin to function in this new type of lifestyle. And they see that it's not as bad as what fear would make it out to be. That's what I'm experiencing for people. Now, what's bad, I've also seen this too. People in absolute denial. Oh, it's not going to happen. And they're the worst kind. Because usually what happens is they're just trying to bury this emotional thing in denial. Oh, just accept it for what it is, but also accept that God is able to do something. And that's what I find, at least for me, and for a lot of other people too, kind of a more proper approach, I think. You know, as long as I have coffee in the morning, I don't care.
That's true. We've learned that about you as well.
That's it. So a lot of people don't know this, but, you know, I tell you, for me, Terry, you have been an inspiration. Maybe I haven't told you this because you have those crazy kidney stones, right? Now, you had a heart attack too, right?
At 4.
4 heart attacks, my
And
goodness.
it was all cholesterol related. And I went through 3 different kidney stone surgeries, and the kidney stones were more painful than any heart attack.
Really?
Yeah. I don't pray kidney stones for anybody. You know, the only one that can have a kidney stone would be the devil, but no one else I don't want to.
Well, you see, I always think about this to perspective, right? So when people see you, they don't know maybe you had 4 heart attacks. How many times did you have this kidney stone thing?
Well, 3 different times I had to do some kind of surgery, outpatient surgery, because the stones, sometimes you can pass the stones and other times they get too big and they have to surgically remove them. And I said to the anesthesiologist, I said, if you normally give someone, you know, a certain measure to knock them out, I said, would you just please go ahead and double mine?
Wow. And see, now I heard you the other day when you were talking to the gal at the Starbucks. Of course, you're typical, friendly, just that's who you are, Terry, right? Sometimes I envy that. I'm kind of a little bit like that myself, but I think you're just on the better side of that, you know. And but somebody might see you and say, "Oh my goodness, you have it all together." You know, you probably never suffered a day in your life. But those that know you know that you went through 4 heart attacks and you went through this kidney stones. I saw them. You know, Debbie, your wife, kind of showed us all what they were like. They looked horrible. They looked absolutely excruciating.
Yeah, and you really have a choice during that time if you're going to grow closer to the Lord or farther away. And of course, I chose to trust Him in the unknown, and Debbie had to trust in the unknown. A lot of times people would focus too much on the person like me who was going through it, but the real focus as well should have been on her, because here she's thinking, you know, there's a possibility that I'm gonna lose my husband.
Yeah.
So I asked people to really minister to her, because there's that fear thing again. You know, fear wants to grip your thoughts and your heart and take you down the street to the worst thoughts that you could ever have. But I learned so much about perseverance. I learned so much about, I learned really to stop asking God why.
Mm.
Because I used to be a why person, or I used to be an if person. And the whys and ifs just really aren't in my category or vocabulary anymore when it comes between me and the Lord. Because now He's shown me that He's brought me through all this pain and all this suffering, and everything was always the unknown of the future.
Mm.
And He's always been there. And so I know that He's got even more things for me to do. And I just know, even through hospice, Patrick, it's been an honor. It's averaging about 2 or 3 people a week that are coming to Christ, that I have the privilege to pray with my dying patients right before they take their last breath on earth.
Wow.
Now they're able to take their first breath in heaven. And, you know, if it's for that, to lead these people to Christ, and I went through those heart attacks and kidney stones, so be it, because it's so worth it to see someone come into the kingdom.
Yeah, you know, everybody goes through trial. So you can't, we're in this world, you go through trial. Very few people go through trial or go through this world unscathed, right? But I know I went through trial. I didn't know where I was going to be. But I can honestly say that I'm a better person. I don't believe God caused it, but God brought me through it. And because I held on to Him, sometimes for dear life, that I'm a better person. I'm actually calmer today than what I used to be. I'm actually a more rounded person than what I used to be. I'm a more compassionate person than what I used to be. Compassion wasn't very high up there for me. I mean, I love people, but I wasn't like you. You kind of listen to people. I was kind of impatient in a way. I'm a lot more compassionate today. I kind of know where people are at. So how did it affect you, going through all these? This is
Well,
over a long period of time, right, Terry? This wasn't just a week or two. This was like...
No, it was over a period of 8 years. But the biggest word I think I came out with was a word that God shared with me, and it's the word preparation. And how He says, you know, look what I've done throughout the whole Bible and church history, church fathers and everyone else. Every single person that God used in any way, if it was small or large, He always was faithful to prepare them. And He prepared them for their next assignment. And sometimes the preparation was being stretched. Sometimes it was going through suffering. And it's like, you know, the Lord's like saying to me, you know what? You want to just know me when you're on mountaintop experiences, or do you also want to know me in the valley?
Yeah.
And how many people sign up for the valley? I mean, I wasn't the first one to have my hand raised to sign up in the valley.
No, nobody likes to suffer. Not in the right mind anyway, right?
No, so I think I came out of there thinking, okay, this is a preparation time. And just as a shepherd gets close to his sheep, I want to get close to my chief shepherd. And I want to hear his voice. It's about hearing the voice so clearly of God that I can say, you know what? That's not my conscience. That's not the enemy. That's my Heavenly Father talking to me.
Mm-hmm.
And I'll tell you one quick story about how I got to know the voice of God. When my twins were only like 2 or 3 years old, we took them to the grocery store shopping, and we had them in the shopping cart. And I made the mistake of letting them out. They're little toddlers, very active. And Debbie and I were looking at labels on boxes. We hardly had any money, and we had to make sure we had our calculator with us, so we make sure we didn't go over our budget. And we're talking and talking. All of a sudden, I look down, and one of the worst things that a parent can go through is the loss of their children.
Mm.
And I looked down, and the kids were gone.
Wow.
And my heart started racing. And I started calling their name. And I raced down the end of the hallway, or end of the aisle, I should say, in the grocery store. And I went around the corner, and down, and all the way down at the other end, the two boys are on the floor with boxes all over them, laughing at each other, having the best time of their life. Now, they didn't see me, and all I said was this: Jacob, Chad, and I'm not kidding you, they turned around because they heard their father's voice.
There you go.
And God said to me, that's how I want our relationship to be.
That's good. That is really good. That is really good. That is really good. Now, God is a good God. He really is a good God.
Oh.
The longer you walk with him, the better it gets. That is for sure. When I started going through my trial, I remember in my living room, and I was there by myself, you know the story. And I said, God, whatever you got to get out of me, get it out of me now, because I never want to go through this again. I didn't realize it was going to take 7 years, but how's ever, And but another thing that happened to me, and this is in a book, actually it's not in the book that I'm writing, and I'm not a writer. I've found that out the last couple of days as I'm trying to edit my book. I'm saying this is really not that good, so I'm going to have some people to help me. But I remember this was probably January, February of 2013. And because I went over to your church that time, if you remember me, I was half beside myself. And I remember asking those questions, why? Why? This doesn't seem right to me. And the Lord came to me. And you know what he said to me? He said to me, Patrick, sometimes in this world, you just get cheated. Remember Uriah. And it clicked. It just clicked. Uriah, as you know the story, Uriah was faithful to his wife, faithful to his king, faithful to his comrades in arms, and faithful to his God. If anybody should have had a blessed life, it should have been Uriah. Then the scoundrel David, of course, what did he do? Committed adultery, tried to cover it up, and he lived, and Uriah died. Strange, isn't it?
But what's interesting too about that story is David, in his deception, tried to give Uriah opportunity to cover up David's sin. And Uriah still stuck to his faithfulness to everyone that you said. And he even stuck to his faithfulness to his wife. Even though he didn't spend the night with her, he didn't go home. You could see that he was still a faithful husband, besides a warrior, and to his king. And so, he didn't deserve anything bad to happen to him. But, you talk about a man of courage, a man of faith, a man that was focused,
loyal.
That's what I believe. We need more Uriahs in this generation that we're living in. And I'm praying that God raises up some more Uriahs.
It's so easy when you're going through a situation to kind of question out. Once I got that into my head, it helped me to say, there is no real reason. Stuff happens. We're living in a fallen world with all kinds of stuff happen. People do stupid stuff. And sometimes you're the fallout, as it were. You suffer the fallout. And there, probably in heaven, Terry, I'm sure that when we go to heaven, a lot of us won't want to know the fallout that we caused other people, It's true, right? But I want to ask you another question. Oh, you've been a pastor for many, many years, been in the ministry. And I think oftentimes there's a perspective of pastors or preachers because of yahoos, some yahoos out there, obviously. And you know how I feel about yahoos. I don't like them. But the perspective is that pastors or preachers or whatever it is, are only in it for money. I met maybe one or two in my whole life, traveling across the United States, preaching in so many different churches, or having guest speakers or whatever it is, that were in it for money. What's your perspective on that? You know lots and lots of preachers and pastors and evangelists and missionaries. What's your perspective on it?
Yeah, I could say I really don't know one in 35 years. And we've always had a heart for missions. And we have supported missionaries and evangelists come into our churches for so many years. And I have to say that in children's pastors, youth pastors, worship, I really can say this. I really don't know one that has ran after money. Mostly, too, is because the salaries aren't real high anyways.
No, no,
And
no.
the salaries are very modest. I see more people leaving the ministry, unfortunately, because they can't feed their families or
That's
they
right.
don't they can feed their families. And the churches need to step up and take care of the men and women of God that are called and pay them for what they're worth.
Yeah.
But I see people leaving the ministry, and I don't know what the statistic is, but I know that there's a low amount of people that once they were a pastor will retire being a pastor. A lot of them, unfortunately, are leaving the ministry, and we have to be able to learn to shut that back door.
Yeah.
We shut the back door with people trying to leave. We need to do something about our leadership because everything rises and falls on leadership.
Yeah.
And we have to be able to shut that back door.
Well, I do know, like a lot of pastors that I know, if they were in the secular world for the same amount of effort and time, and you know, right, Terry, you know how long hours pastors work. They say they work a lot. And, what I found was a lot of pastors, first of all, they don't get paid an awful lot of money. Okay. And we have this crazy perspective oftentimes. Well, if you're not blessed financially, then there's something wrong. Well, usually what it is if a pastor or a preacher gets blessed financially, then there's other people kind of complaining, well, he's only in it for the money. You know what I mean? That's what happens. And then I find that the expectation on a pastor is unfair oftentimes. And I think it's indicative of our culture. If you get say a pastor or preacher back in the 1920s, well, he didn't probably have to teach so much on how to be married and so much on how to have a family and so much about all this kind of stuff, because society in general, culturally, had that, as it were, ingrained in it. But now somebody goes to a church, okay, maybe their family is broken, maybe they're looking to the pastor to be a financial advisor, they're looking to the pastor to be a hospice caretaker, looking to the pastor to be a healer, looking to the pastor to be as it were, this all-wise sage that can give them answers to anything, looking to them to be a surrogate father for orphan children. And it's just I think it's an unfair expectation, to be quite honest with you. I think that's why a lot of pastors, they suffer, as it were, I wouldn't say burnout, but fatigue, just general fatigue. I've seen this an awful lot.
They do. One of my main concerns for many years for pastors was so many of my friends and colleagues, and I couldn't believe it, had an insecurity problem.
Mm.
And most pastors were just so insecure in their leadership. And sometimes that insecurity would drive them to go to a place they shouldn't go to, and that's performance or favoritism, just areas they shouldn't go to. But the insecurity was always something that pastors would feel that they have to, maybe compete with others as well. But pastors are very delicate. They're very fragile. They compare themselves to others too much.
Yeah.
They compare themselves to others' churches. It always made me sick to my stomach when I go to a meeting with pastors and they want to talk about their budgets or how many people were in attendance and things like that, because really it just comes down to faithfulness.
That's
No
it.
matter if you have 10 people or 10,000, it's about being faithful where God has you. And I tell people, you need to bloom where you're planted. And if that's where God has you, that's your assignment.
Yeah.
Then give God excellence in your assignment.
That's it. And I think oftentimes the culture of success, which everybody who's in business wants to be successful, of course, and you want to be successful in your field, but it spills over into the church sometimes in an unhealthy way, and I think we're just kind of wired that way, especially in the Western world, whereas, well, how big is your church? Well, maybe my church is 200 people. Maybe my church is 100 people. I think a lot of people don't realize that the average church in America is only 90 people. And I know very qualified, skilled men and women of God that don't have big churches. You know what? If you start comparing yourself to anybody else, you will begin to get insecure.
Well, the insecurity that pastors face is one thing, but the second thing, too, is they have to be careful not to become workaholics.
Yeah.
Because as servants, sometimes servants have a hard time saying no.
That's right.
And we turn into becoming man pleasers instead of God pleasers.
There you go.
And we have to be able to say no and feel good about ourselves. We have to protect our day off. We have to do self-care.
Yeah.
We have to make sure that our marriages are intact, our children are intact. And so that's the most important thing is pastors, they'll say, well, I'm going out and I'm going this and I'm going out. I have to tell you a heart-wrenching thing, a lesson that I learned. It was so tough. I was pastoring in Crystal Lake, and we had a home in McHenry, and our 4 boys were real small. And I was working full-time at the church. I was teaching driving, some lessons for students to make extra money. And I was doing so much ministry, I wasn't home very much.
Mm.
And my wife told one of the boys, she said, now go set the table for dinner. And we were a family of 6. And so my son looked up to my wife and said, do I set it for 6 or for 5?
Mm.
And she says, what do you mean for 5? She goes, well, Dad's never home.
Mm.
And she told me that story when I got home that night. And I just broke down and I started to cry because I told God, I said, God, I'm feeling you in my assignment, and I'm feeling my son and my family. And I said, there's nothing more important than my relationship with God and my family.
Yeah.
Ministry is not more important than my wife and my children.
Yeah.
And I was trying to justify by working and saving this person and helping this person or serving this person. And here I could have lost my own children.
Yeah.
And what good it would have been to do that. So
No.
I would just tell pastors, please, if you're working too much and you're on that line of workaholism, it's not too late. Remember we talked about second chances and going back.
There you go. Yeah.
You know what? It's not too late. Change your schedule now. Keep God and family.
I read a book years ago, Terry. It's not a Christian book, but it changed my life. And I think I'm glad I read it when I did. It was given to me back in 1992. And it's 7 Habits of Highly Effective People by Stephen Covey.
Mm-hmm.
And he based, we're all planners. If you're not a planner in a ministry, well, the tyranny of the urgent. You just get railroaded.
Absolutely.
Right? But he was talking about 2 things that struck me in that book. Was he said that a lot of people try to climb the ladder of success only to find out when they get to the top of the ladder, it's leaning against the wrong building. And I never forgot that. And the second thing, of course, was you base your calendar on your roles. So you base your goals on your roles. So if your role is a father, a husband, pastor, friend, brother, all the way down, right? And then you put out your calendar accordingly. And then he went through this whole exercise of, imagine you're going to a funeral, and you go to the funeral, you sit down, and you walk up to the coffin, and you're going to give a eulogy. And you look in the coffin, and you see you in the coffin, not as an old man, but as you are right now. And then one by one, the people that are closest to you go up and talk honestly about you. Well, thankfully, I read that book back in 1992. And I would joke with my church. I'm a little bit edgy, you know that. And I said to them, the people, I said, you know what? A lot of you are worried about what I think about you when you know, but church said, there's 400 people here. I don't think about you. Unless God puts you in my heart, it's impossible. And then I would say to people, I'd say, you know, I can't go out for coffee with everybody. If I did, how many people can I actually meet? And so I would kind of explain that to the church. But I did see pastors go through that unspoken rule, as it were, where they worked and worked and worked and worked and worked, and then they would crash and then try and do it again. And they would go for about maybe 5, 6 weeks or 7 weeks or whatever it was, a couple of months, and crash again. Some of them got sick, and it's not pleasant.
Well, I remember hearing Rick Warren in person at a conference, and he talked about the very thing you're talking about, where he had to teach his church that he can't be everywhere, you know, all the time, and that it's about the body of Christ ministering to the body of Christ. You know, every person's a minister, basically. Every member's a minister. And so he tells a story about one of his friends in the church was in the hospital. And of course, his friend was expecting Rick Warren to come and visit him. But Rick Warren got smart, and he established and he trained and he recruited people to do visitation ministry of all different kinds. And so, of course, those people were sent to go to this person's hospital room. Well, they walked in, and the first thing the guy says is, "Where's the pastor?" And they said, "Well, we're here sent by the pastor, and we want to read scripture and pray with you and encourage you." And they said, "Well, is the pastor going to come and see me?" And so Rick Warren, because it was his close friend, went to the hospital and was standing out in the doorway where his friend couldn't see him. And he was listening to the conversation. And the folks just said, you know what? Everyone's on the same level here. There's no heroes in the faith. There's no superheroes in the church. And because there's no superheroes, you know, we're coming, the pastor sent us, but the pastor can't be everywhere at every time. And Rick Warren said that they finally got it, because the person that was in the hospital bed finally said, you know what, you're right. I'm sorry that I'm not accepting your ministry. Please minister to me. And then Rick Warren heard all this. He went to the nearest chair. He put his hands in his face, and he started to weep because the church got it.
Yeah, you know, it is true that, and in many ways, it's a mark of faith that God can use somebody that's not the preacher, right, to minister healing. Oftentimes, they're better at it. I used to joke, and this is true, Terry. I went out one Sunday morning, and I said, you know what, guys? I said, I'm not really a pastor. Shock and horror. I said, I'm not all that patient. I really don't want to sit down for an hour and listen to all your woes. I said, but we do have wonderful pastors in the church. These are real men or women, couples or whatever it is. And they have that gift of compassion that they can really minister and then come up with a word of wisdom to help you through a trial. I used to do the cheat sheet, you know. It was, don't tell me your problems. I'm going to pray and the Holy Spirit gives me the answers. That was a typical evangelist. But that's how I used to operate. But once we begin to see that there's other giftings in the body, you know, some of the people that ministered to me, especially as a young believer back in Ireland, they weren't great preachers. They didn't know the Bible that great, really. But they had a gift of compassion. They had a gift of compassion and love that ministered to me where I needed it right then. And I never forgot it. Of course, I got saved through the Full Gospel Businessman. So there are a whole bunch of guys that weren't professional preachers, as it were. but they definitely knew God, and they could help you, and they could lead you through it, and it was a wonderful thing. It was a wonderful thing. So that's one thing that really strikes me is the perspective of what it is to be a preacher in the pulpit. it's not what a lot of people may think it is. It's like any job, really. It's not really what people think it is. But tell me, you're down in Florida. It gets cold up here, Terry. So I will expect at some stage a phone call.
I remember how it gets cold. I have to tell you, I was in my garage the other day, and I was going through the boxes of some photographs, and what pops up, but one of these, it's only about 8 inches long, but it was an ice scraper.
Oh,
People
remember
for their car windows.
Yeah.
I'm like, I don't know if I should save this just to remember, or if I should just throw it in the garbage.
Yeah.
So
no, what you do is it'll be a prayer. It will inspire you to pray for all the men and women up in the North Midwest during January. I will never forget when I came over here first, because I used to watch Sesame Street as a kid in Ireland, and I'd see them wearing these earmuffs. I said, there must be real weaklings in America that they have to wear earmuffs. And then I came that winter of 94, 95, I was preaching over in Savannah, Illinois, at a Little Assembly of God church. It was like minus 20 or something. It was like really cold. I never experienced cold like that before. And I said, now I realize what they go through. And then I never forget it. Wally DeGrassi, you know Wally DeGrassi.
he goes to my church now.
He goes to your church there, yeah.
I didn't even know he retired in the Villages, and he didn't know I was here.
Isn't that something?
We reconnected. He's in my church now.
Isn't that something? I like Wally, but Wally was driving around sometimes. I don't know where we were going, and I saw a lake, and there was trucks on the lake. I said, what in the world? He said, yeah, they're going ice fishing. I said, it's not for me. I'm not doing that. So what are your plans? What are your next plans? Of course, what's the name of your church, first of all, down there in Florida?
The church is Sacred Fire Church.
And what's your website?
sacredfirechurch.com.
Yeah, sacredfirechurch.com.
.com, yeah.
And what do you like about it, Terry? Why do you like pastoring it?
What I like about it is it's an elderly church, a lot of retired veterans in the church. There is some young families as well. But I like a smaller congregation. And the congregation is pretty mature. There's not a lot of whining. There's not a lot of complaining. And here, I'm starting to sound like an evangelist now. But it's a maturity. It's people that, what I like most about it is people recognize where God brought them from and what he brought them to.
Yeah.
They recognize where they came from, because a lot of people had some really hard lives. And God brought them through the cross, the bloody cross, with forgiveness, got rid of condemnation and guilt and shame, and just took care of their ugly past and just set them on the rock. And these people enter into worship. They don't care who's there or what's going on. They just love God, and they love each other. And so they've welcomed us with open arms, and we came at the right time. God knew what he was doing, because the church was hurting and grieving from the loss of their wonderful pastor, who was a great leader, great man of compassion. And so we came and we turned the corner, and the church isn't grieving anymore. And so we're excited what God has for us in the future.
That's awesome. That's really well. If there's anybody that can do that, it's going to be you and your darling wife, for sure.
The Energizer Bunny.
Yeah, the Energizer Bunny. She's something else. She's something else. So, you're doing that. You're doing the hospice. If people were thinking about you and all the other hospice workers out there and all the other, healthcare workers, what would you say to people just to kind of encourage them?
Well, I think that all the healthcare professionals, and I happen to be one of them, of course, but what we really need right now is prayer for God's protection, because the virus is real. But we also really need encouragement, because these healthcare professionals are weary. They're exhausted. They are putting in long hours. And so, you know, they, just like everyone else, they have a professional life,
Mm-hmm.
a personal life. And for mine would go to number three, mine would be also a church life. So I got the professional life with hospice. I have my personal life with my family, and then I have a church family. So I got
Yeah.
three things going on.
Yeah.
But the healthcare workers have their personal life and their family life. And people that are working in healthcare right now, Patrick, are just worn out. They
Exhausted.
need encouragement.
Yeah.
They need prayer. They need to be acknowledged
Yeah.
that they are appreciated and respected.
Yeah. Yeah. You know, I think oftentimes we do become inner focused, and we forget that these people are out there to serve. Forget about the political stuff, okay? But these people are out there helping people day in, day out, and you know, they're you know, they have to go home to their families. They're actually, you know, people can say, you know, this is really contagious, not contagious. I don't care, because these people don't know they could get it tomorrow, and they could bring that back to their family. Think about that. And yeah, I think so, absolutely. So how long do you think you're going to be doing the hospice for?
Well, there's, boy, just looking at the news and everything that's going on in our world globally, you know, we've been saying for a long time, Jesus is coming back.
Yeah,
But boy, it sure seems to be an urgency in my heart
yeah,
and my spirit for that really to be happening in our lifetime would be nice. Um, Hospice, how long would I be doing it? Probably as long as I can, because it's about serving people, the patients.
yeah,
It's about serving their families.
yeah,
And being there is an honor in their most desperate time of need.
yeah,
Be able to pray for them and encourage them. And really, I'm going to use this word that it means a lot to me, and that's being present.
yeah,
Being present with people is important in ministry, as you know,
yeah,
but being present with someone who actually knows that they're going to be dying soon, and the family is grieving and the family's going through difficult times. Um, you know, I just count it an honor and privilege, and I want to do it as long as I can,
mm,
because my goal is to see more people get into the kingdom.
yeah. Super. Well, that's what I always say. You're a true pastor, Terry. I know you're an evangelist, but you have that heart of compassion. I'm praying that I get that heart of. I have a heart of compassion. I'm not like a cold guy.
You come a long ways, baby, right? I mean, I'm looking at your background there of Hollywood.
Well, I tell you, you know what that is this whole idea of Hoban to Midnight. It came out of, I was down preaching for a friend of mine, Thaddeus Searcy, and I was hanging out with his brother. Thaddeus has a church called Freedom Church. It's freechurch.org. Great preacher, great guy. And we kind of went through a big trial at the same period. And his brother is a music artist. He's an artist and producer. So I was hanging out with him, and I was kind of figuring, what in the world am I doing? You know, these talents and giftings. And so he brought me over to another chap's house. He said, you know what? You should do this. And I thought, there's so many different preachers out there, so many different teachers. Do you want something else? And then as I let it percolate, I thought, wouldn't it be wonderful to have conversations with my friends, what we would talk about over a cup of coffee, where we don't really care about what people are, we're not putting on a performance. We're not in that preacher mode or whatever it is. And then to kind of invite people into the living room and listen in. This is how we talk. This is what we do. Of course, I have an eclectic bunch of friends, that's for sure. And some of them are a little bit edgy. But so as people know, I love jazz. I listen to jazz all the time, and listen to Art Blakey and Miles Davis, and, you know, Duke Ellington. I just love jazz. So my sons and I, we talk all the time. And I said, guys, you know, I'm trying to figure out this Hoban to Midnight. I bounce all my ideas off my two sons, if you can believe it. And they said, yeah, Dad, that's really good, and I think you should do this. And I said, well, that's what I'm thinking about. And I came up with this background. And they said, that's it, Dad, because it's like as if you're in this little cul-de-sac. You know, you have your jazz artist behind you that you love. This is your environment, and just invite your friends and talk. And that's where it came out of. So Hoban to Midnight. That's it.
I love it. The background is excellent.
Isn't that fun?
Yeah,
Yeah, it's
it's a
fun.
lot of fun.
It's fun. So one of these days, maybe I'll have a real background like that. So
That would be.
anyway, Terry, one of these days, hopefully with the grace of God, I'll meet you down in Florida because I don't want to meet you up here during the cold. So I need an excuse to
Well,
go
you
up.
probably won't see me up north when it's cold.
No, no. I used to escape. You see, I used to either head to Ireland or head to Florida or head to India on a mission trip. So it broke up the winter, but I
I
haven't
mean,
done
there
that
would
for a
have to
while.
be, for me to come back up north in January and February, there would literally have to be a burning bush experience like, Moses had. For me to say, for God to say, go to the North Tundra.
Yeah, go back to Egypt or something like that, right? So, well, I tell you, it was a wonderful time talking to you. I admire you very, very much. You really have uh, affected my life in a very good way. I admire your ministry. I admire your family. Uh, and so just from me to you, you have definitely been a blessing in my life. That's for sure. And thank you. And say hi to Debbie for me and tell her that one of these days I'll see her in Florida. So,
Well, as long as you're ready to drink a lot of coffee and go to the beach or, hit the swimming pool and let me cook a steak on the grill for you,
oh, hey, I'm down there.
you're always welcome.
All right. I appreciate it. All right, Terry. God bless you, brother. And we'll get this up on the internet soon. And your friend's going to join in on the conversation.
Thank you for your time. Love you.
I love you too, man. God bless. God bless.
All right. Bye.